You didn't get robbed last night. No broken window. No masked intruder. And yet, your money may be worth less than it was a year ago. That's what makes inflation so dangerous. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like life is getting expensive. But it's bigger than grocery prices. Bigger than greedy companies. Bigger than shipping containers. Inflation is a system-level choice that decides who gets richer, who gets squeezed, and who quietly loses decades of savings without ever seeing a bill. And if you don't understand how it works, you'll keep blaming the wrong villains, while the real machine keeps running. Inflation is the decline of purchasing power. Same paycheck. Same number in your bank account. But fewer groceries, fewer liters of fuel, less rent covered, less future. Prices are the symptom you notice. Purchasing power is the injury you live with. Now here's the part most people miss. Inflation doesn't only happen when governments print money. It happens when the total amount of spendable money grows faster than the real economy's ability to produce goods and services. That spendable money can come from new government money, direct or indirect. New bank credit, loans created into existence. Policy choices that push demand faster than supply can respond. Shocks that shrink supply while money keeps chasing what's left. Different sources. Same outcome, the currency buys less. Most people picture inflation as a printing press. But modern money is mostly keystrokes, created through credit. When a bank issues a loan, it doesn't usually hand you someone else's saved cash. It creates a deposit, new money, then expects repayment with interest. So inflation is not just a government problem. It's a money and credit problem. And once you see that, the story changes. Inflation isn't merely prices rising. It's a distribution event, a reshuffling of claims on real resources. Some people get the new money early. Some people get it late. And the late arrivals pay higher prices. That's not a conspiracy. That's sequencing. Central banks try to steer the economy with interest rates. Think of rates like a thermostat knob in a building with millions of rooms. Turn it down, borrowing gets cheaper, spending tends to rise. Turn it up, borrowing gets costly, spending cools. But here's the catch, the thermostat doesn't heat every room evenly. Rate changes hit. Borrowers versus savers. Renters versus homeowners. Big firms versus small businesses. Governments versus households. So when people say, they'll fix inflation by raising rates, what they really mean is, they'll slow the system down by making credit more expensive. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it breaks something else first. Central banks often aim for low and stable inflation, around 2%. That sounds small, until you stretch time. At 2% per year, money loses about half its purchasing power in 36 years, rule of 72, 72 divided by 2 is equal to 36. So the target isn't price stability. It's managed decay. Why would any system prefer that? Because moderate inflation helps debtors repay in cheaper money. Hurts cash savers, your stored labor melts. Inflation doesn't always arrive the same way. Let's break it into 3 routes. Route A, too much money plus normal supply. Money expands faster than goods and services. Prices drift up, then climb. Route B, supply shock plus money stays loose. Suddenly fewer goods exist, energy shocks, war, bad harvests. Even with unchanged money, prices jump. If policymakers respond by pumping demand, inflation can stick around. Route C, confidence breaks. Once people believe prices will keep rising, behavior changes. Workers demand higher wages, businesses raise prices preemptively, people spend faster. Inflation becomes self-feeding, until something snaps. Now let's put history on the table, without recycling the same greatest hits. Example 1, Revolutionary France and the assignats, money backed by promises. In the 1790s, France issued paper money called assignats, originally linked to confiscated church lands. At first, it looked like a clever solution: finance the state, stabilize society, keep the revolution alive. But once the door opened, the temptation was unstoppable. More notes were issued. Confidence weakened. Prices surged. And here's the lesson. Even when money is backed by something on paper, political pressure can turn backing into theater. When money becomes a tool to solve every crisis, it stops being a store of value. Most people experience inflation through rent, food, healthcare, education, transportation. But official inflation is calculated through baskets, weights, adjustments, and substitutions. That doesn't automatically mean it's fake. Measurement is hard. But it does mean you can have a situation where the headline number looks calm, while household life feels like a chokehold. Especially when the fastest rising costs are the ones people can't avoid. So when officials declare inflation under control, it may simply mean the metric is under control, not your monthly budget. Inflation is a transfer mechanism. Usually hurt cash savers, fixed income earners, workers whose wages adjust slowly, anyone late to receive newly created money. Often benefit major debtors, asset owners, sometimes, if prices of assets rise with inflation, institutions that can reprice quickly, governments financing large deficits. Inflation doesn't treat everyone equally. It rewards proximity to the money spigot and punishes distance from it. So when you hear people argue about inflation like it's a natural disaster, remember. When trust in currency weakens, people look for anchors. Historically, that meant land, durable goods, commodities, and yes, precious metals. In the modern era, it can also mean scarce assets, global currencies, alternatives with fixed supply rules. Not because these are perfect, but because they represent a protest against permission money, money that can be expanded, managed, and diluted. When a society accepts permanent inflation as normal, people eventually seek a financial lifeboat. Now we reach the uncomfortable part. Inflation usually isn't what happens when the system fails. Most of the time, inflation is what happens when the system works exactly as intended. Because the modern economy isn't built on saved money. It's built on credit. And credit-based systems don't like standing still. They need expansion to stay stable. If credit stops growing, the machine doesn't simply pause. It tightens. Defaults rise. Businesses cut back. Layoffs spread. Tax revenue falls. And suddenly the biggest debts in the system become dangerous again. So here's the truth nobody says out loud. A world with perfectly stable money sounds fair. But it's politically inconvenient. Because stable money makes debt honest. And honest debt is heavy. If your currency holds value, then $1 trillion in debt stays $1 trillion in real terms. You can't. People close to newly created money usually adjust first: large institutions, major borrowers, governments, asset owners. People far from it adjust last: workers, savers, anyone on a fixed income. So inflation becomes a conveyor belt of wealth. Moving purchasing power from the slow to the fast, from the cautious to the leveraged, from the public to the system. And then the final trick: normalization. Once inflation is constant, people stop demanding stability. They start adapting. They take more risk, chase assets, speculate, and call it being responsible. Because in an inflationary system, playing safe is punished. Saving cash becomes losing. Waiting becomes losing. Being careful becomes losing. And that's how a policy becomes a culture. So when you hear officials say, 2% is healthy, understand what they're really saying. We prefer a world where money slowly rots, because it makes the debt-based system survivable. That's the design. And history doesn't just show that inflation can destroy empires. It shows something more frightening. Inflation can become so normal that people stop recognizing it as a choice. They blame stores. They blame corporations. They blame supply chains. They blame everything except the architecture of money itself. But once you see the architecture, you can't unsee it. Because inflation isn't just economics. It's governance by percentage. If you understand inflation, you stop being surprised. You stop reacting late. And you start asking the only question that matters. Who benefits when money loses value, and who pays the bill? If this gave you a new lens, subscribe to Empire of Money. Because history leaves fingerprints. And money always follows the same patterns, just with new names. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.